I was shocked when my parents gave my sister the house I had bought. The house was sold as soon as I ceased making mortgage payments. I am now completely stunned and unable to speak. I am presently 28 years old and paying back the mortgage on a home that I purchased from my parents. Later on, I found out that my sister had received the house as a present from my parents. The thing that hurts the most is that they never informed me about it, even though it's remarkable that they went to such lengths for my sister, who is 25. Although I had always felt that my sister was loved more by my parents than I was, I never realized how much. Sadly, my parents did little for me, their oldest daughter, despite their intense love for my sister. They were constantly expecting so much of me. While my sister Sally was pampered like a princess, I was instilled with responsibility from an early age. My parents gave her the impression that she was a princess, even though she wasn't. Despite their lack of cash, Sally was free to do as she pleased. While I concentrated on my academics, Sally was never held to any academic standards by my parents. It was always the case that she was free to follow her interests and passions. My parents were quite clear about what they expected of me and stressed the importance of developing a strong career. Upon graduating from high school, I was unable to afford to neglect my studies. To make sure I could go to a technical school, my parents took money out of their savings and took on debt. I suggested that parents co-sign an educational loan for me, with the intention of repaying it when I began working, rather than using my personal funds. They disagreed with the plan, though, pointing out that the high interest rates would make it cost 1.5 times as much. I wasn't old enough to completely comprehend how loans operated at the time. My parents agreed against it, therefore I thought it was best. I had just turned 18 at the time, and I believed they were attempting to shield me from financial hardship. But I had no idea that it would eventually be used against me. I found a reliable career in the tech industry as soon as I graduated from college. They had just what they desired. Although parents took pride in my accomplishments, I always thought they were hoping for a return on their investment in me. Never forget the sacrifices we made for you, they told me again. Remember where you come from. It appeared innocuous at first. Over time, I came to see that they were manipulating my emotions, even though I initially believed they were doing it to keep me grounded. They were quite good at making you feel guilty. The pressure only became worse after I started working. Whenever I came home, my father would incessantly inquire about my development. He had saved his entire life for my education, and I would never forget it. My parents sacrificed so much for me, and I had to work hard to pay them back. I realized they needed a new home. They have been carefully saving for years just to utilize the money for my college tuition. When I went home for the holidays, I was still new to my first job, which I had begun less than a year before. During supper, my father looked at me and said something that made me uneasy. "We contributed to your schooling. It's your time now to arrange for the purchase of a home for us. Rent cannot sustain us indefinitely." I felt sick to my stomach when I heard those words. Although I knew my parents wanted me to purchase a home, I didn't anticipate that it would happen so quickly. I had just been working for a year when I still lived with two other ladies in the same flat. Owning a home on my own was out of my price range. My parents urged me to buy a home in spite of banking institutions' protests. "I just began working, Dad. Even my own flat is out of my price range. Why are you now requesting such a large sum of money?" I objected. My father paused and then remarked, "We raised you to plan and work towards your goals. You wouldn't have been able to attend college without us." My mother replied in a kind but strong tone, "You wouldn't have become the person you are now. I want you to pay us back for that loan." I lacked the guts to tell them they were mistaken. Because of their efforts, I am in my current position. But sometimes I wanted to yell, "Who asked you to do all that for me?" because I couldn't stand their lectures. However, I never had the guts to face them. I started to put some space between me and my parents, only answering their calls in an emergency and not going to see them at all. Since then, I've avoided them by citing my hectic work schedule, but the thought of having to purchase a home for them has never left my thoughts. I saved and worked hard for 5 years before giving in and buying them a house. It was a little, charming house in a peaceful area. Although it wasn't opulent, it was cozy. It all appeared to be going well. It seemed to me like the least I could do to pay them back. I kept making mortgage payments for 3 years because my parents had done so much for me. I even paid more to keep myself out of foreclosure. But I had other goals in life. I wanted to travel, raise a family, and enjoy my own house. I couldn't keep making mortgage payments indefinitely. After I bought the house, my parents stopped bugging me all the time. They gladly shared the success of their investment with friends and family. There was still a void in our connection, even if I didn't pay much attention. I stayed away from my family and didn't go home too much. I made the decision to go home for the first time in a long time one day after being overburdened with work for months. I told my folks I would be visiting. Instead of surprising them as I had planned, I was met with an unexpected surprise. My sister Sally's vehicle was parked outside the home when I turned into the driveway. I was looking forward to a family reunion and assumed she would be coming to see. Sally had moved out and gotten married years ago. Since our parents were still renting their previous home, I hadn't seen her very often. I was at her wedding the last time I saw her. Sally answered the door when I knocked. I thought she was only here for a brief visit because she was dressed in pajamas. We greeted each other and gave one another hugs. "Hey, what are you doing here?" she then inquired. "That's what I want to ask you," I joked in response. "Where are Mom and Dad?" I questioned her as soon as I entered. From the couch, Sally casually said, "Oh, they moved out." I was taken aback. "Relocated? What are you saying? This is their home." I pushed her. "Oh, I guess they didn't tell you," Sally shrugged. "They handed me this house, actually. I now reside here." The earth felt like it was moving under me as she spoke. She said it in a casual way, as though it had no deeper significance. The house I had been paying for all this time. "I needed the house more than you, according to Mom and Dad. You know, I'm expecting a kid shortly." They had agreed that the home should go to Sally. Startled, I inquired about our parents' current residence. They were renting a flat on the opposite side of town, she said, as if it were the most commonplace thing. Without a word, I walked away. I drove directly to their new flat because I was so furious. I immediately started screaming, "What's going on?" as soon as my mother opened the door. "I've been paying for this property, and Sally informed me you handed it to her." "Explain yourself." As though it were little, my mother gave me a grin. "Calm down now, please. First, come inside." I didn't anticipate your level of concern. I went inside, but I didn't take a seat. I was looking for answers. "Why didn't you ask me before giving away the house I purchased for you? What made you believe that I shouldn't know?" With a sigh, my mother seemed to think I was being crazy. "To be honest, we've given this a lot of consideration. You don't have to worry about yourself since you're successful. If Sally doesn't have a home of her own, do you want her children to grow up in an unstable household? She can concentrate on their pleasure now that she won't have to worry about rent." My rage exploded at what she said. Where my niece or nephew grows up is irrelevant to me. I don't see anything wrong with them renting a house. We were okay living in rentals ourselves. Furthermore, I have no responsibility for their circumstances. Sally and her spouse ought to deal with it. They should look for better occupations if they wish to be financially stable. "Why are you making such a fuss?" my father said as he entered the room after hearing the disturbance. "We have an obligation to give Sally with the financial security she needs. You had more possibilities than she did. She deserves the house because we didn't pay for her college degree." I couldn't believe it. "How can you say something so ridiculous?" I inquired. "You didn't have to pay for it in the first place because she didn't attend college, correct? Remember that she left high school early. They obviously didn't realize how serious what they were doing was." "You've already achieved success," they responded. "You can just buy something else." Sure, I can buy something else. But I've always emphasized that it's for me to say, not for you. I felt as though the universe had flipped over after hearing what they had to say. I was very perplexed and unable to understand their reasoning. I ended up leaving their flat in a hurry, checking into a hotel, and then unwinding ever since. I just don't know how to go from this point on. I can't give up in this manner. After learning the truth, I don't want to keep making mortgage payments, but handling this challenging circumstance is really challenging. I am certain that my sister can pay the mortgage, even if I am aware that my parents cannot. All of this took place on Friday. It is Sunday today. My trip back home is scheduled on Tuesday. After I calmed down, I thought about leaving right then, but I knew I needed to address more. I would want to see how much of my mortgage is left. It should be paid off sooner rather than later because I have been overpaying. I emailed my father to inquire about the amount of the overdue mortgage before the visit. He stated that he would have to check with the loan manager. "Please take me to the bank tomorrow," I said in the message. "Even if I don't want to keep making mortgage payments, I must confirm the remaining amount. I must comprehend the problem completely. I cannot defend making these contributions in light of all that has transpired. Buying the property in the first place, in my opinion, was already a big help. I have no illusions about the fact that my sister and parents have obviously taken advantage of my kindness. I don't think I have to continue making payments on a house that is no longer mine. I need to be clear that I cannot support property that was transferred without my agreement, although it could be worthwhile to talk about this with my parents." Then a fact was revealed that was much more intolerable. I just returned from a trip to the bank when I was devastated by what I saw. I never received credit from the bank for the additional mortgage payments I made. My dad had been making only the minimum mortgage payments. They were using the extra money to cover their flat rent. This is the disastrous reality. I've been attempting to pay off the mortgage early, living simply, and managing my finances. I discovered that I had been paying around 1.3 times the required amount when the bank manager showed me the monthly deposit records. "There must be an error," I insisted. I transferred my father a certain amount each month, which we discovered when we looked over the transaction history. According to my father, the manager's records are correct. The precise sum was contributed to the mortgage. He grabbed my arm and exclaimed, "The records are correct." But I had the impression that he was puzzled or misunderstood. "You were correct. We'll discuss this further later." I was devastated by his statements. The thought of another betrayal made me feel lightheaded and overwhelmed. I listened in silence as the manager went over the remaining mortgage data and debt consolidation possibilities throughout the discussion. My father drew me aside as soon as the manager left and said, "What made you mention the additional payments? For the mortgage, were those intended?" "Yes, of course," I said, raising my voice. "Otherwise, why would I send more money?" I was shocked by what he said next. I thought it was for our expenses. He said, "But I've been using it to pay the rent." I slumped into a chair and buried my face in my hands after staring at him. How am I supposed to face my parents now? "It's not that big of a deal," my father, who was seated behind me, replied. I was unable to conceal my rage. "Isn't it a huge deal? Using my excess money for rent, forcing me to purchase a property, and then secretly handing it to Sally. Is none of it significant?" he said. "The truth is that you didn't gain anything from purchasing the property, but I used all of my savings to pay for your college education. It's not too much to expect for a little retribution." He went on, "I made the mortgage payments on schedule using the funds you gave for the house. What's wrong with paying the rent with the additional cash? I'm not requesting additional funds from you." I am unsure of how to react to this betrayal and the perverse explanation they are providing for their behavior. The extra money was meant for early repayment of the mortgage, not to cover the costs of your new flat, I protested, indignant at what he had said. I started down the path after leaving the bank. Despite hearing my father yell my name, I continued going in the direction of the tube station without turning around. During many phone calls and texts, my mother said, "Come home so we can sit down and discuss this matter." I didn't respond. I had no desire to speak with them any longer. I made the morally correct decision to oppose their dim-witted behavior. The way my father was manipulating the issue to make me feel burdened truly astounded me. In addition to having the right to feel upset, I also have the right to establish limits. I must be clear about my position. Although I am a very kind person, it is clear that my parents have been taking advantage of my generosity in this case. Ignoring their texts and calls is perfectly acceptable. I must keep putting my own health first. I was shaking with rage at the time. I thereafter went back to my house and carried on with my everyday activities. As planned at the beginning of the month, I failed to give my father the mortgage payment when the month changed. My father attempted to get in touch with me, but I had blocked him, so he was unable to do so. My mother, my sister Sally, and Sally's husband have also been barred. I decided to cease making mortgage payments in an effort to find serenity. I had had enough of being manipulated. So be it, if my parents decided to give Sally the house. She must assume the obligation, she should handle the payments. My parents were incensed when they learned that I had halted the payments. Numerous voicemails and calls came in from unidentified numbers. I wasn't sure, but it's possible that they were using their pals' numbers. "We can't afford the mortgage if you stop paying," they yelled. When I heard it, I couldn't contain my laughter. I no longer have this issue. I also blocked all of those numbers. But the problem didn't stop there. When I got home from work 3 days later, my father was standing at my door, irate. "This cannot end like this," he shouted. "You owe us. You went to college because of us. You are who you are now because of us." "I've already paid enough, haven't I?" I countered. "Are you even aware of the amount of money I have contributed to the mortgage? Compared to what you paid for my college tuition, it is far more. I owe you nothing." I interrupted my father when he accused me of lacking gratitude. "No, don't attempt to make me feel bad. I'm done. I will no longer cover your rent or any other costs. You make that decision, not me. I am at my breaking point. After raising me as a college investment, you treated me like a commodity. You want to take money out of me forever now. I am not a commodity." I hurried down the corridor and drove off after saying those things. I didn't go back to my flat. I feared he would come after me. More drama was not what I wanted. He was gone by the time I returned later that evening. My mother phoned me many times and left panicked voicemails each time. Additionally, Sally left a long note outlining the importance of the house to her family and how self-centered I was to not provide for them. However, I had at last been liberated from their control. I have ended my relationship with them. I never thought it would come to this after spending so much of my hard-earned money on a home. The residence eventually entered foreclosure. My parents were already having trouble paying their flat rent, and Sally was having trouble keeping up with the mortgage payments. It became hard to manage the rent, the mortgage, and other costs. I anticipated this when I stopped making payments. They would eventually come to that realization as well. I found out that the house was up for sale about a year later. My parents made an unsuccessful attempt to regain the property with their meager retirement and savings assets. Sally and my parents became very tense. Due to financial difficulties, my parents requested that Sally and her spouse pay half of the mortgage. Sally maintained that they should pay the entire cost because the house was a gift. My parents saw their error at that point, but it was too late. They made the decision to sell the house at auction. My father made a substantial profit on the selling of the property. They made the proper decision, in my opinion. I don't anticipate receiving my down payment returned, which I have contributed over the years. I've come to terms with the fact that they don't intend to return it. At least they aren't acting like kind benefactors anymore. Everything they invested in my education, including interest, has already been paid back. I don't feel bad about severing my relationship with them because of this. My uncle and other family members claim that my parents have downsized to a smaller flat in order to save money on rent. In order to maintain themselves independently of me in retirement, they have also begun saving the money they got from the home auction. They have asked that Sally take responsibility for her family and have fully ceased providing financial assistance. My parents stuck to their guns despite Sally's attempts to guilt-trip them. For them, this was a wise decision. In order to protect my privacy, I have also hired my own flat. I've begun saving for a house that will be genuinely mine. Distancing oneself from family is never easy, but occasionally, even the people who are meant to love you the most may use you. I don't regret my choice, even if it took me some time to realize this fact. I think I should be respected, and not only seen as a source of income, whether I'm with family or not. It's heartbreaking to hear of my family's breakdown, but they're at last recognizing the repercussions of their stupid behavior. Have you not heard me? You useless high school graduate, you're dismissed. Gather your belongings and depart the business right away. It's just horrible that you're hanging about here like a parasite. After I had worked for the family firm for 20 years after high school graduation, my father, the head of the company, spoke those words to me. He was obviously serious, even if at first I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He'd intended to pass the business on to his beloved grandson, Preston, who had recently graduated from Harvard with an MBA. Preston will now serve as the trainee director. Don't you understand that having his high school graduate aunt around would be a hindrance? Something broke inside of me. Today, I'll pack up and step down. Goodbye? I bounded out of the firm, disregarding the efforts of my colleagues to stop me. I had no idea that a week later, my father would phone me sobbing and ask me to come back. Blanca Lewis is my name. I was an avid sports fan in high school, living with my mother, Maria, who worked in accounting, my sister, Holly, who was academically bright, and my father, Frederick, who had a tax office. I was always good in athletics and belonged to a lot of groups, but Holly was a bright student. Our relationship was special because we respected one another's abilities, but my parents didn't understand sports and preferred my industrious sister. My parents never came to support me, not even when I participated in state-level long-distance competitions. However, that didn't deter me. I knew that the findings would not betray me, regardless of how much my parents didn't like me. I grew more assured of my development the more I ran. As a result, I received offers for long-distance sports scholarships from many institutions, but my parents, who did not understand the importance of athletics, opposed my admittance to college. After high school, I decided to take use of the confidence I had developed from long-distance running and quit college to work at my parents' tax office without their permission. My parents essentially pushed me to join due to the staffing crisis, but I was eager to show them that they were mistaken. But the obstacle was formidable. It was initially challenging for me to deal with taxes because I was a sports-focused student, but my perseverance from long-distance running got me past. I moved out of my parents' house and started living alone when I finished high school. My parents also insisted on this, since they believed that I shouldn't be dependent on them indefinitely as a working adult. Are you really going, Si? On the day I left, Holly, the only one who appeared upset about my leaving, said me farewell at the door. I apologize, Holly. My only regret is leaving you behind. But I swear to stay in touch and invite you to visit me sometime. I reassured Holly by smiling and ruffling her hair to calm her anxiety. I'll be waiting, I replied. Holly, in contrast to me, was a little reserved and appeared to want protection. I felt bad for leaving her alone in that place, but I assumed she would be okay because our parents were nice to her. I reasoned that I would be there for her immediately if something were to happen. I let go of Holly's head, said my last goodbyes, and left the house because I felt like I was being a little too protective. Preston was born and Holly married a few years after I left. Her spouse was the son of a man my father knew and who he highly recommended. I loved Preston as an aunt, and on the weekends I would take him to the park. Preston developed an attachment to me, and we had a great relationship. But as Preston got older, my parents started showing him too much affection. In particular, my father was quite keen to prepare him for the role of successor. Preston was a bright student who had always said he wanted to head a company. He was held to high standards by my parents, who even meddled in Holly's parenting. My father demanded that Preston concentrate on his academics, so we gradually stopped going to the park on the weekends. The gap between us widened with time. I was completely ignored by the time Preston got to middle school. My parents barely acknowledged me since they were so involved in his tutoring and extracurricular activities. Holly appeared to be sorry, but I told her it was okay. What counts is Preston's future. Preston ultimately gained admittance to Harvard and started the MBA program with my father's ardent support. High school graduates should just focus on work, my father would say to me every time he heard about Preston's admission. I brought a handkerchief to wipe away his happy tears, but he smacked it away with those well-known words of contempt. The last straw was when my parents chose to go to Preston's enrollment ceremony without inviting me. The hostility was becoming more pronounced. When Holly apologized to me on the phone, I reassured her that everything was okay and she didn't need to worry. I was aware of her frustration at not being able to influence our parents' actions. I decided not to bother her anymore. I believed that my parents would finally recognize me if I could obtain my tax accountant certification. But in contrast to what I had hoped, my parents became less affectionate towards me. They stopped responding to my pleasantries and left my queries unanswered. Like an overbearing mother-in-law, my mother would frequently say, "You don't even realize that this is why high school graduates are useless." At times, she even gave me direct reprimands. Then a pivotal moment came one day. I finally earned my long-awaited qualification as a tax accountant. I made the decision to get certified after working for the firm for a number of years in order to increase our clients' confidence. I had to pass 5 SEP Southeast tests over the course of several years in order to obtain it. I used this method to my advantage, passing one topic year over the course of 5 years to obtain my certification and become a tax accountant. I told Preston and Holly the news first. As though it were her own achievement, Holly was ecstatic. Preston's message was brief. "Congratulations." Clients started to have more faith in me as a consequence of my renewed drive and dedication to my profession. I would respond to clients' requirements right away, even after work hours. "Blanca, thank you." They would smile in appreciation and remark, "I'm so glad you're in charge." That turned into my biggest happiness. I'd always responded promptly, and even on the weekends, I gladly accepted invitations to barbecues and golf outings. "You put in a lot of work, don't you?" My coworker Elvin Wilson mentioned this to me as we were having a cookout with our clients. He looked surprised that I took an active part in conversations with clients. I simply did it because I found it enjoyable. Conversely, Elvin didn't much enjoy events like these. Although he had a tendency to become attracted to those close to him, he showed a startling lack of interest in professional ties. What made him pursue a career in tax accounting? That didn't alter the fact that he was passionate, though. We had a good relationship, and I knew I could count on him in an emergency. "What are you discussing? You're also working hard. After all, you are here for your clients. Make the most of it and enjoy yourself, please. I've consumed around 5 portions of beef so far. You're overindulging in food. Do you actually have experience running big distances?" Apparently, I didn't look like a former long-distance runner after consuming so much meat. How impolite. I joked that although I had always had a voracious appetite, I had restrained myself when I was an athlete. Together, Elvin and I enjoyed the BBQ that day, dragging our clients into the fun with our light-hearted banter. I gradually became important to customers as I kept spending days like this, forming relationships with them alongside Elvin. Before I knew it, I had risen to the top of the company's sales, acquired a number of significant clients, and seen an increase in my accounts revenue. At last, my efforts had paid off. You succeeded, Blanca. Your efforts have truly paid off. Elvin, thank you. I suppose I'll soon need to take things seriously and emulate you. Were you not serious until now? Although I couldn't resist teasing him back, Elvin's words of congratulations truly moved me. I had a lot more fans after that. In addition to Elvin, I grew my network both inside and outside the organization, and every day seemed more fruitful and satisfying. But my parents were the same as always. They believed that since they had let a high school kid like me work for the firm, it was only fair that I give back, regardless of how much I contributed. Top achievers received trophies during the company's festivities, but once again, I was the only one left out. I was so frustrated that I couldn't get my folks change their minds. Then I learned that Preston had graduated with high honors from Harvard. He was on his way home after finishing his MBA. There were conflicting emotions when Preston was thinking of going home. Once my beloved nephew, he now bears the whole burden of my father's expectations as the successor. Nevertheless, I wanted to truly celebrate his return as his aunt. When Preston returned, my father planned for him to start working for the firm right away. He proceeded with the succession plans as though I didn't exist, declaring, "Preston will lead this company into the next era." Holly contacted me and sounded sorry. "Dad is very obsessed with Preston, sis." "Don't worry about it." I tried to stop him. "Preston most likely doesn't give me a second thought." "No, it isn't accurate. You're very important to Preston," I added. I thought of Preston and hung up before Holly could finish. It reminded me of the park days we spent there. I never thought things would end out this way back then. Preston soon came back to work in my father's tax office. He was given the benefit of not working overtime during his first year, and my father gave him one-on-one mentoring. In the meantime, I carried on with my regular schedule of working weekends and extra. Nevertheless, I continued to work hard and gained our clients' trust. "Blanca, thank you very much for being here." The clients' compliments turned into my encouragement. "I feel at ease when it's in your hands," they said. Then an odd thing occurred. I was surprised to get an invitation to Preston's welcoming party, which my father had planned. "Looks like your folks are finally starting to recognize you," said Elvin. "No way." Elvin, who was seated next to me, leaned over and whispered that he believed, maybe, just maybe, my parents were beginning to notice my efforts as I watched them converse with Preston in the reception-style setting. I was on the verge of believing him. With a glimmer of optimism after all the effort I had put in, I turned to face my parents, and to my surprise, my father turned to look at me. He said something to Preston and then walked up to me. I had no idea, though, that he was about to crush all of my expectations. "Blanca, as of today, you're fired from the company." "What?" At a gathering like this, I was hearing things that I couldn't believe. When I looked at my father's face, I thought I could have misheard, but there was no sign of a joke. "What? What'd you say?" "Have you not heard me? You are dismissed, you useless high school grad," I replied. "Gather your belongings and depart the business right away. Like a parasite, you have been clinging to this area. It's repulsive." I hoped it was a miscommunication, but it wasn't. He meant it. My wrath became stronger the more I considered all I had worked for, and the more I realized that he was actually attempting to dismiss me. I faced my father for the first time, letting my emotions out. "Since high school, I have devoted 20 years to my business and to you. Why, father? How could you be so cruel to Blanca? This is excessive." Holly, who had been invited as well, attempted to step in. "As the trainee director, Preston will take over. Don't you realize that having his aunt, who graduated from high school, here would be a challenge?" "Hey, that's going too far," Elvin interrupted, addressing my father with obvious rage. "I've worked with Elvin for years, and I've never seen him so furious. Sir, there are some things you should never say to your own child, regardless of how much power you have. And who do you think you are, speaking to me like this?" My dad lost his temper. "This tax office is led by me. What I say is final. Or do you want to be let go with her?" My father was unforgiving, even of Elvin. Should my presence result in Elvin's termination as well, then Enough. Something inside of me snapped, and I coolly cut off their chat. "You too." Elvin appeared to protest, but to be honest, I wasn't paying any attention. "Today, I'll pack up and head off. I'm grateful for everything." "Blanca, wait." "Sis." I gave my father one more look and sprinted out of the arena, nearly running away, disregarding Holly's plea. It was painful to acknowledge that, despite my best attempts, my parents had never heard of them. But I didn't want Holly and Elvin, who were at my side, to see my pathetic state. Perhaps it was time for me to move on from my parents' firm and try to succeed on my own somewhere else. Maybe my only option was to help my nephew Preston. Perhaps it was no longer my time. Later, I would have to be sure to apologize to Elvin appropriately. These kinds of ideas raced through my head as I sprinted back to the firm down the dark road, and I could feel the tears starting to fall. It was pointless to cry, of course, but I was resolved to utilize these emotions to my advantage. With that determination, I pulled my phone out of my pocket, put it on the phone, and stopped running. I went about bidding our clients farewell the following day. They all apologized for my leaving, and several of them insisted on going with me to my new position. But it would be wrong to steal customers. I made an effort to respectfully reject, but I was unable to discourage clients who voluntarily chose to change tax offices. They refused to make any concessions and adamantly said that they wanted me to be their consultant. I felt really grateful. It had a profound effect on me. Additionally, I was unable to control my emotions in front of my clients, the majority of whom chose to accompany me to my new workplace. Yes, I phoned Simon Foster, the director of a tax office I knew, as soon as my resignation was verified the night before. And after telling him everything, he extended an offer of employment. You must have had a difficult time. This is a place where you may unwind. It would be a pleasure to have you. Because Simon was so amiable, I recall opening up to him and even babbling about unimportant topics while crying. But he just listened calmly and nodded. I remember his kindness. Even over the phone, his remarks, "If your father treats you that way, feel free to consider me as your father figure instead," seemed more fatherly than those of my own father, and I gradually came to feel determined to put in a lot of effort for him. I thus joined Foster Tax Office soon after quitting my previous job, embarking on a new journey. After a few days of effort, I was making more progress than I had anticipated. My salary and standing at Foster Tax Office had improved, and I had the full backing of the director and the majority of my previous clients. My drive only grew as I sensed Simon's faith in me, and I discovered a fresh enthusiasm for my job. I was astonished to see a large number of missed calls from my father when I checked my personal phone a week or so after I finished employment. I had never gotten a call from him before, so I was taken aback. As I listened to one of the voicemails, I heard that his tax office was facing financial difficulties due to a significant loss of clients. The business is in jeopardy, and Preston has also left. Take action. Do you still wish to work for my company? As soon as I heard my father's egotistical appeal, I cut the message. To be honest, I no longer considered him to be a parent. My concern, however, was raised by the statement that Preston had departed. Holly picked up the phone as soon as I did, and she sounded utterly worn out. Preston, it seemed, had resigned, was staying at a motel, and was not going home. He intended to go to a different tax office since he had become dissatisfied with my father's strict management style. Holly claims that Elvin and the other employees resigned in large numbers as a result of my termination. Elvin. I hadn't even gotten in touch with him. It seems like he didn't care about me. I hung up on Holly and just gazed at my phone's list of missed calls from my father. It seemed like I was in charge of my father's business now that Preston and Elvin were gone, along with the other employees and customers. However, I carefully closed my phone and erased the missed calls. A few months later, Holly told me that the huge resignations of employees and the client exodus had caused my parents' tax firm to go bankrupt. Due to its inability to continue operating, my parents' tax office had to close. They were heavily indebted after taking out a loan to remodel the workplace. It's doubtful that any tax agency in the sector would consider hiring my father now that his image has been damaged. Holly informed me that my mother works part-time in retail, and my father now works labor-intensive part-time jobs, both of them struggling to make ends meet while trying to pay off their debts. I would have wanted to say that Holly told me that, but I was surprised to learn of my parents' predicament from someone else. Elvin was the one. Elvin, You seem completely different now, don't you? Your outfit now seems far more costly than it did before, and you look like a CEO. Hey, did you see? I won the lottery, indeed. $10 million. 10 million? Keep it down, Shay. You keep it down too. To my utter surprise, Elvin nonchalantly remarked, winning the jackpot, as he abruptly reached out and materialized in front of me. He spoke with pride at first, but as he went on, his tone softened. In actuality, I founded Wilson Tax Office with the money I won. All of the employees from your father's business asked if they might join me because I'm now the director. I believe I now have a better understanding of what it means to be admired as much as you are. Elvin, it would have been lovely to live it up, but I couldn't choose the easy route since I saw how hard you worked. I became a director in order to properly care for everyone and work shoulder to shoulder with you. As a director, you already have a good reputation. The fact that you're working side by side and not being yourself is almost aggravating. Of all people, Elvin, you're suddenly superior to me. However, I must admit that I don't dislike you. Are you falling for me? I considered putting a wrestling grip on him by wrapping my arm around his shoulder, but I changed my mind. Rather, we wrapped our arms over one another's shoulders and shared a chuckle while anticipating what the future might bring. After that, I let Holly and Preston stay in my flat while I worked, watching them to make sure they were okay. I took them out to eat one evening at a restaurant when their color and appetite gradually returned. The three of us ultimately had a lengthy conversation about everything there. Preston said that he had chosen to step down because he had become more and more disenchanted with my father's strict management approach. He couldn't stand the antiquated procedures that went against the management ideas he had studied at Harvard after I fired him. Our parents had been the only ones to tear us apart, but as a family, we had never really been at odds. Talking about the past occasionally cast a shade over Holly and Preston's features, even though they had nothing to feel bad about. Holly, however, expressed regret for all the pain she believed she had caused me over the years. She persisted despite my attempts to convince her that she was not blamed for anything. She was almost too sincere all the time. To be honest, thinking about what may have occurred if you hadn't been there, sis, scares me. Preston and I doubt that we would have recovered our strength to the extent that we have. Well, we're family, but I would have been SAD if you and Preston weren't doing well. Therefore, do you believe it would be ok to let each other to view our imperfections a bit more? Sis, that said, I plan to drink a lot tonight, so take care of me if I get totally wasted. What? Hold on, sis. I let out a loud phew as I took a long gulp of the beer in front of me, a little over the top. I didn't want them to hold back, maybe, especially after making the effort to take them to a restaurant. We thus drank, laughed, and made a commitment to continue living as a close-knit family of three. Simon greeted Holly and Preston with warmth when I assisted them in joining the foster tax office a few days later. Our strength seems to have increased. Let's defeat Wilson Tax Office, our adversary. I'm depending on you all. Yes, sir. Since then, Elvin and his staff have been enhancing the reputation of his office, and before we realized it, Wilson Tax Office was on par with Foster's. Foster's spirit of competition inspired the three of us to be even more driven. We promised to work hard for the director and our clients as a single family, committed to give it our all each and every day.